This is Jim Fetzer, your host on The Real Deal, with my very special guest today, a Russian student of 9/11, Dimitri Khalezov, who has been conducting studies of the possible use of nuclear weapons in destroying the Twin Towers. Dimitri, it's a great pleasure for me to have you as my guest on the show.
You're welcome.
Please do give us a bit of a sketch about your background and how you became interested in 9/11.
I used to be a military officer in the Soviet Army during the time of the Soviet Union. And the place of my military service was at the special department of the Soviet military, which was a 12th chief directorate of the Ministry of Defense. And this organization is like the official name of it is a Nuclear Technical Service of the Soviet Army, and which is responsible for maintaining of the nuclear arsenal of the state. And in this organization there was a smaller department which was called the Special Control Service. And I was particularly a serviceman in this department. And the Special Control Service was responsible for detecting of nuclear explosions and also for controlling of observance of various treaties related to nuclear explosions. So during my service in this organization, in the end of the 80s, it came to my knowledge that under the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York, there were nuclear devices that were intended for demolition purposes. So this it was known to me as an emergency nuclear demolition scheme of the World Trade Center. I would put it this way. So since that time, I just knew this, and when the towers were destroyed on September 11, I just tried to understand why it was destroyed, and I used my knowledge since those days, and especially ground zero definition that was used to describe the place of the former World Trade Center. And you know, the ground zero it used to mean in the former English language a place of a nuclear explosion. So that's how I get to this point.
Well, this is very interesting. Of course, construction on the Twin Towers began in 1966 and occupancy in 1970. So you're suggesting that, in fact, the nuclear technology in 1966 would have been sufficient to bring about a very controlled form of demolition of the two towers using then available technology. Is that right?
You see, at the time when I was a military officer in that Special Control Service, I did not know much technical details of this. I just knew about the fact only. So I just knew that there was such an idea, and there was existent nuclear demolition system. But I don't know much about the technical details of that those days. I just only know that it was based on huge thermonuclear charges buried under the World Trade Center, just like 50 meters below its foundation, and not much, just like this. Basic knowledge only.
Well, this is very interesting. Tell me a couple of more things before we pursue this. Did you have a background then in physics and science before you became into the Soviet military and assumed that?
No. I don't have anything to do with the nuclear science at all. What I know about the nuclear weapons is just because I was a military officer. And you know, because the Soviet Union, it was a nuclear state, so every Soviet military officer should have some basic knowledge about the weapons of mass destruction. It's just a part of the military training. So that what I know about the nuclear weapons is just like every Soviet military officer know. But because I used to serve in particularly the department which was responsible for the nuclear weapons, I know a little bit more than just the ordinary officer, but not as much as a scientist.
Was there an impression among you or your colleagues that when the Twin Towers were destroyed that it had been done by means of some kind of nuclear demolition?
You see, I did not talk because at the time when the Twin Towers were destroyed, I no longer serve in the Soviet military. I resigned from it in 1992. So like 9 years prior to that, and at the time I didn't even live in Russia. I used to live in Bangkok, Thailand, so I didn't have much chance to discuss it with them. But I discussed with a couple of my former colleagues later, like in a few days later. Yes, they agree with me also.
They also believe that it was a form of nuclear demolition.
Not that they believe, they are sure, because they heard about this. Because as I told you, in the end of the 80s, we knew about it. So once you know about this and you see the result, you don't need to guess. It means you know already.
Yeah, I'm very interested in that, because if it was in the foundation, you would think that the observable effects would have been very different than they were, which of course was that the two towers were exploding virtually floor by floor from the top down. One would have presumed that if there were nuclear devices in the sub-basements or below the foundation, that it would have had different observable effects. Am I mistaken?
You see, many people believe that because somebody used this phrase, so-called pancake collapse. But if you carefully review the video evidence available when we shows the Twin Towers collapsing, it doesn't look like pancake collapse, because you didn't see you cannot see any floor. What you see is just like the tops of the tower are falling down with near speed of free fall without meeting any resistance whatsoever. So I don't think there were any floors. Remaining floors or remaining big pieces of the structure. It was just like a powder. So unlikely it can be called pancake collapse.
Oh, I agree completely. I agree completely. It was no pancake collapse. It wasn't the sagging of the trusses. All of that which we've been given by the National Institute of Standards and Technology, I think, is clearly false, and that none of the evidence supports it. And indeed, I have had witnesses such as Father Frank Morales, who was a first responder from St. Mark's Episcopal Church in the immediate vicinity, explained to me that the two towers were actually destroyed below ground level, so that unlike Building 7, for which there was a 47-story building, for which there was a pile of debris about equal to 12% of the original height of the building, or around 5 floors. Here there were no floors, even though it ought to have been more than twice as high a stack of debris had it been brought down in a classic controlled demolition, which of course was the case for Building 7.
Yes, but I believe that the Building 7 was destroyed by the nuclear explosion as well.
Really?
Yeah, because it was pulverized almost entirely. What remained from Building 7 was, I don't know how to explain it. The Building 7 has a special construction. It means its foundation, underground foundation, was smaller than its entire footprint if you measure by the wall. So it was I don't know how to explain. There was a special construction, and the outer walls of the World Trade Center 7, from the ground level until around the 7th floor, they were not connected to the foundation. They were just like the false walls. So when the Building 7 collapsed, actually what remained from it was the false walls, only about the 7 stories high, and the rest was just pulverized. So that's why I think that it was also demolished by a nuclear explosion. And the problem is that the place of the World Trade Center 7, it also has a long, underground, what they call underground fire that remained for about 4 months. So if it were ordinary controlled demolition by the normal explosive, there will be no underground fires then. in case of the World Trade Center 7.